It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George, and Big Ten play has started. We're now in the thick of it. We're out of the stupid games that I will forget about in a week, and now we are in the slightly less stupid games I will forget about in 2 weeks. So it's fine. Ohio State beats up on Michigan State 38-7. Still a lot to talk about. Okay, this wasn't just a snoozer. This was something where I think there was a lot of intricacies, a lot of ins and outs and things that we can talk about.
Yeah, Jonathan Smith said after the game, 38-7 isn't that close, but I don't know. I would say that he deserves a little bit more credit than.
Well, and before we get into all this Ohio State
rather.
stuff, because I think we will talk about Ohio State a lot here. I do want to say I think he is really good for Michigan State. That team, that program went from, what the hell are we going to do? We've got this guy who's just this albatross around our neck, right? Who is dragging us down as a program, embroiled in this scandal, all this other crap. They find this guy from Oregon State, and he is just a perfect culture fit. He is a perfect personnel fit. He's done a really, really good job in a really short time.
Well, he totally renovated Oregon State's image too before he got to Michigan State.
That's
and
right.
I think that's probably why they looked at that. And granted, I believe he's an Oregon State alum. I think he played football for them, if memory serves correct. So you would think he was going to want to do right by his alma mater. But I think Michigan State probably looked at what he did there and say, okay, we're in a position where we thought Mel Tucker was going to be the guy to replenish.
That's why we gave him $100 million.
Yeah, and then kicked him to the curb and thrust ourselves into an NIL controversy in the process.
Yeah, right.
But they probably looked at what Smith did there and said, okay, you can probably do something reasonably similar for us given the resources that we have. So what do you say you give it a shot? And I mean, granted, for that guy in that position he's in at his alma mater to be tempted out from there to a school like Michigan State says something about his comfort with taking the job in the state the program was in and what their expectations obviously are to succeed relative to what they were thinking Tucker was going to do for them. So I hope that they have patience with him through the first few years, just speaking generally. Obviously, as an Ohio State fan, I'd rather not see Michigan State succeed or reach exalted heights. But just speaking purely from the perspective of a college football fan, or if, we're going to do the whole incestuous fan of other programs thing, the way that the SEC people do, that we want to see all the Big Ten schools do well when they're not playing Ohio State. I do think that he is a good person for helping them reclaim their image, and that it's going to be tough to judge him on, this season, but I think the future is bright, particularly with Aiden Childs.
I was just about to say, I mean, and that's the thing, you watch that dude and you can tell there's growing pains, right? Obviously, the stuff that he's throwing out there occasionally where you're like, whoa, where is this going? Why is he bothered doing this?
It's a lot like watching Anthony Richardson with the Colts.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah. Or somebody actually made the comparison to, when Nebraska had, oh my God,
Adrian Martinez.
Yes, both Martinez, where it's you see the raw talent. Now you got to see the progression of talent. The interception that he threw was just horrible, but he also
they were kind of already out of the game at that point.
Exactly, and he was just trying to throw him back into the game. He was just doing everything they could. He's got a live arm. He's super athletic, and he's only 19 years old, so he's going to be really, really good for them in the future. I'm glad he's not really, really good for them right now, because I feel like that would have put a lot more pressure on Ohio State than than maybe they were ready for it, at least at the onset of the game.
And the other turnover he had, I mean, really shouldn't have even happened. It should have been invalidated by a face mask penalty.
Right.
So if
it was caused by the face mask, I mean, that's what made it happen.
If that ends up being a 15-yard add-on to the end of the play for Michigan State, and they keep the ball in the red zone as opposed to giving Ohio State back possession, where they then, I think they went down the field and scored after that, or that might have been the next drive, which was when Jeremiah Smith did all the one-handed ridiculousness. But yeah, I mean, if that doesn't, and it's funny because we were, as we're all watching the game together and people are kind of like dreading the way things are going as Michigan State is driving again. And I just have to remind everybody, based on what Aiden Childs' MO has been this year, he's due for a turnover pretty soon here in short order. And then it happened. And of course I, look like Nostradamus at that point, but but I'm even conciliatory to the, point that I say this really should have happened and I would be heated if I was a Michigan State fan. And to that point about, Jonathan Smith saying 38-7 isn't that close. That one break in the game, I mean, if Michigan State gets a touchdown there, it's 17-14.
Right.
So it's a completely different narrative getting close to halftime and then for the rest of the game, as opposed to Ohio State getting the ball back, scoring again before the half, and then being up 24-7. It's a completely different complexion of the game. So Childs, even though he's still, you have the growing pains, as you mentioned, he was not the reason that they fell out of this game as dramatically as they did. In fact, he probably played well enough in the first half to where they were reasonably making things competitive.
Yeah,
and,
no, I think he played really well.
Better than the final score indicates.
Absolutely, they did. And what really, I think what the backbreaker was is that Ohio State's it's an interesting place that we'll kind of start here, I guess. But Ohio State's defensive line, even without Tyleek, he could have played, but he was still held out for precautionary reasons, which I think is definitely the right move. Their defensive line, I thought, played really well, honestly.
They played a lot better than the Marshall game.
Yeah. And it's not that they were getting a ton of quarterback pressure. I mean, a lot of that was just because, the whole MO.
They had 4 sacks.
Yeah, I mean,
that was as many as they had in any conference game last year.
Right.
So
which
the
is
fact
great.
That they did that in the first conference game this year is I think a very, very good sign of progress.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those sacks came towards the end of the game as they were just kind of teeing off, on a offensive line that, they're going to pass. They have to take longer steps, but that's fine. My point is, though, is that I was impressed by the fact that they were able to bottle up Michigan State's running game pretty well. Didn't allow them to extend drives for the most part, at least after. I mean, you look at the first couple drives and you're like, all right, well, this is, I think, where a lot of people were getting a little.
Yeah, we did just
irritated.
gas up Childs pretty hard, and he finished with -9 rushing yards.
Yeah, right, exactly, and he's an athletic dude. Kieran Lynch-Adams, a guy who a lot of people like a lot, was held to pretty much nothing. I mean, less than 4 yards carry, under 35 yards is what I'm looking at. So they
averaged less than 2 yards per carry as a team.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's great. And that's the thing. And so considering you're doing that without Tyleek, I was pretty happy with the way that all went down. Allowed less than 200 yards passing. I think that's legit. Defensively, that's where people at the beginning of games, I think, have kind of wrung their hands a little bit. And I will say that, first of all, Jim Knowles is really great at second half adjustments, right? So like you saw in the first half, Michigan State had a couple of successful drives. Obviously, one of those was ended with a fumble that probably should have been called a fumble. And there are a lot of people wondering, why are the linebackers getting just eaten up on some of these, just like, simple, out routes, like right above their heads? Why are the safeties, kind of just like not understanding where they're supposed to be? But as the game went on, they kind of figured out, what kind of coverages to play against Michigan State. They figured out when to blitz appropriately. Guys like Caleb Downs was heavily invested in stopping that short passing.
This was definitely the most impactful game I think Downs has played so far.
He's gotten more impactful every single game. Like that, yes. The first couple games, I don't think anybody knew where the hell he was on the field. And then in Marshall, you're like, oh crap, this guy's making some hits. And in this game, nobody's able to advance a pass past him. Like that's what's wild, is that there was one specific play where he sniffs out, people were circulating on Twitter, where he sniffs out the screen pass. And it's not just that he figures it out immediately. It's the fact that he's so fast. Like normally that would have been maybe a 2 or 3 yard gain, even if you had a guy who was immediately on it. But he's so fast that that's a no gain or a negative gain play, because he's able to get to that ball carrier, that receiver so quickly. I was really impressed by his play. I think Jim Knowles is going to continue to find ways for him to make impacts on the field. They do have to tighten up their linebacker play. Cody Simon, I think, is playing well, but Styles just seems lost a lot of the time. I think Arvell Reese is definitely going to, we do that snap count thing right after the game, see, who played what and when and all that. I think Reese is just going to get more and more snaps as the season goes on, which sucks because I think Styles is a super good athlete, but he just seems kind of confused as to where he needs to be on any given play.
People have been calling for Reese to play more since the Akron game, even where there was, I think, some early concern about CJ Hicks' effectiveness, which I think he's been pretty good as a pass rusher out of the linebacking core, but otherwise he's kind of been, I think, the most underwhelming player for me so far this year. I was really excited to see what he was going to do finally at the heart as the key heart of that defense and being a former 5-star recruit. And it's the well-roundedness that you need out of the linebacker playing in the middle of your defense. It's kind of incredible that Ohio State as a unit has been as effective as they have been, just given that we haven't seen the kind of improvement that we thought we were going to get with him there relative to, even though, again, like Eichenberg, obviously not a bad player by any stretch, but given that he kind of started his career out on a similar sort of standing as what, in terms of profile to Tough Borland, and still having the bad taste in our mouths from Borland as fans, I think people have been waiting a long time for, like, when are we getting the next Bobby?
Yeah, or when Ryan, like a Ryan Shazier, right? Like, when are we getting the guy who will fly around and be that dude who can just impact every play?
There's been a great thirst for that as Buckeye fans, I think, for one. I think a lot of people, myself included, were optimistic that Hicks was going to fulfill that, and it just it hasn't really taken place. But to something else you said, second half adjustments have been something that, like, since great coaches that's kind of the minimum standard that you expect from them. And that's kind of been what I've come to realize, even since watching this team as a kid. Like, we had them with Jim Tressel, we had them with Urban Meyer, and they've been apparent throughout with Ryan Day as well. But with Ryan Day, again, it's been more reflected, I think, in the offense than before Knowles coming in. Knowles, I think, has been pretty consistent in terms of second half adjustments, but it's really stood out this year that, they're just totally putting the clamps on teams. And I wrote 3 key stats this week as I assisted with the coverage of the game. And the last one that I finished with was the second half offensive yards, because it was really interesting to me that before that last garbage time drive, before when they put in Tommy Schuster for Childs,
and they were just
they got 32 yards out of that last minute whatever drive. So prior to that last minute where the game was basically over already, Michigan State had 33 total offensive yards in the second half. And that reflects a trend where the only game this year where Ohio State has given up more offensive yards in the second half than the first half was the Akron game. And in that case, it was 88 yards against 89 yards in the second half. Western Michigan, they gave up 99 total yards for the entire game. Western Michigan got 5 total offensive yards in the second half.
I didn't realize it was that bad for West. That's wild.
It was unbelievable. And then the Marshall game, obviously the first half was way more competitive than anybody was anticipating, both Marshall's first drive and their 2-minute drill. Ohio State gave up a little more than over 200 offensive yards in the first half, which I think really probably jumps out at you and sets off some alarms. But then they only give up 61 offensive yards in the second half. So kind of good job stemming the bleeding a little bit. And then obviously you just heard it was, I think, 181 yards total for Michigan State in the first half, this most recent game. And then technically 65 total in the second half. I wonder how consistent of a trend that's going to be when they start playing teams that are more competitive, that just don't have to abandon the run entirely to get themselves back into a game. And then Knowles kind of just owns in on stopping the pass, and then they're able to totally mitigate that. So when they play games that are closer in the second half, I'm going to be curious to see how much more conciliatory they are of offense generally. But it's a very good sign that when this team gets ahead, they're not letting teams get back in the game by any stretch.
Right. And I think
it's a very, very good sign, I think, for the rest of this season.
Yeah, and I think some of that's all. I mean, obviously dictated by what the offensive, side of the ball does in the first half. Because if you're up going into halftime, 24-7 or whatever it was, I mean that dictates pretty much the entire second half, right? Like, and Michigan State had the ball to start the second half, which means, okay, let's say you run your regular offense, you go down and you score points, even if you don't score a touchdown. Let's say you just get 10 points, coming out of that. That's a positive thing that I think changes the entire tenor of the game. The fact that they basically went 3 and out, immediately after halftime, that's it. That's game. That's pretty much game, because then Ohio State can kind of call their shot and figure out, what they want to do. And Michigan State has to start passing, way more than they want to.
My rule in college was if Ohio State's up by 3 scores at the half, I'm going home. Because the second half is just going to be garbage time.
Yeah.
The whole way, based on how good this team is. And I never missed an exciting game as a result of that. So
there you go.
I felt pretty good about that. And I think that kind of speaks to the viewing experience that comes with this team too.
Yeah. And, the first half, I mean, if you look offensively, you can talk about the individual performances, but obviously Jeremiah Smith, everything that he does just looks completely bonkers. And he's clearly the best wide receiver on the team. I mean, again, nothing against Emeka. Like, Emeka is still really good, like really, really good. Jeremiah Smith is just that.
Emeka was the leading receiver.
Yeah.
Even though Smith got all the highlight.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, I don't know that Emeka makes that one-handed catch. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that he does some of those things that Jeremiah Smith has done. Again, they're still both fantastic. I'm not trying to trash him at all, but regardless, my point with that is we saw a little bit of bad Will Howard, right? Like, we had talked about this on the Dubcast, where at Kansas State, this is a guy who occasionally has been prone to just kind of letting his inner sexy Rex Grossman out, you know what I mean? And just like winging it and making bad decisions.
I don't know about that. Rex Grossman, his mantra was F it, I'm going deep, because he could throw it deep.
Well, that's true.
Howard can't throw it deep at all.
Yeah, no, well, but sometimes
Howard's more like F it, I'm going 15 yards or
less.
less.
That's right.
But maybe I'll throw a button hook that's double covered anyway.
No, you're right. But that I think that attitude of like, whatever, this is, it's one play, I'm just doing it.
Unleash the dragon.
The dragon. Like, I feel like he has a little bit of that in him. And when the game gets a little, when that wheels on the, on the cart of the game gets a little wobbly, he starts to want to, I think he kind of goes with that vibe and he wants to start just winging it. And at Kansas State, you look at some of those games, you can see how it would get him in trouble, right? Like, there were a couple games where he had like 3 interceptions, multiple turnovers, like elsewhere. Like, that's not, obviously you're going to lose those games. At Ohio State, yes, you're still going to see some of that, but because you have the safety net of Quinshon Jenkins, according to the broadcast, like, seriously, the play-by-play guy, I think his name is Siciliano, which is fortuitous, but anyway, I think he said that like 5 or 6 times during the game, calling him Jenkins. Anyway, the fact that Howard has Judkins and Henderson and Jeremiah Smith and Emeka and all these other dudes to really just act as the safety net, he doesn't have to do everything. He doesn't have to feel that he has to do everything. And so, like, when a guy bails you out like that, then I think it mitigates some of the bad Will Howard that might show up from time to time. Ryan Day and Chip Kelly can shut him down a little bit, him meaning Will Howard, and say, you know what, we're running Judkins 10 times in a row while you get your head on straight, right? And that'll be fun.
What I wanted to see after he threw the interception.
Exactly.
We didn't really get that. But
no,
he settled in, to his credit, for kind of the rest of the game.
He did. He did really well after that. They had to, after his interception, I mean, they basically came out and they went on this long touchdown drive, facilitated by, some huge plays, including a big run by Travion Henderson. But but that's kind of my point. Like he'll get that and he can kind of like settle down a little bit. And then of course they got him that rushing touchdown later on, which I know that he had been, kind of wanting a little bit. So, not the best performance out of Will Howard, but also I think it maybe is a preview of what Ohio State will do later on in the season if they enter a danger zone against like Penn State or, Oregon or somebody like that. They have other guys they can lean on to kind of take that pressure off of Will Howard to try to do a bunch of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So I was heartened by that. I thought that was a good development.
You wonder how much of that, like, I need to be the hero mentality, like, carried over from Kansas State, just because he was certainly not playing with the level of skilled player talent there that he has at Ohio State now. So I wonder how much of it is going to be a process in terms of filtering that out, because he really, with the amount of talent available, does not really need to be doing anything other than, and not only the talent available, but the talent that he has as a dynamic quarterback in his own right.
Yeah.
He just has to make the correct decision every time for this offense to be successful. It's just a matter of, are you going to make the correct decision every time? I will say I am more concerned for Howard coming out of this game than I am encouraged, just because of that interception that we saw. But then I also think about, how did he throw the interception against Marshall? It's because he did the Rex Grossman going deep thing to Jeremiah Smith. And I think about the play that Smith made in this game where Howard chucks it up. It wasn't a great throw, I don't think, but Smith is able to make the one-handed catch in spite of not only the throw, but also getting his face mask pulled.
Right.
Which, you think the refs were probably like, we got to give them back that one after the one that we missed earlier. So, at least we're consistent in not calling these face masks. But I'm worried that the confidence in Smith is going to be so high that they're going to be more encouraged to try those kind of deep completions to him as the season goes on. And that's like, I can totally see them like.
I don't think that's the best use of Jeremiah Smith, though.
No, I totally agree. But if that's how they feel like they need to keep defenses honest in terms of deploying the long ball, because they're not encouraged that Howard's going to be able to hit guys that might be open, further than 20 yards downfield otherwise, that's just going to leave them prone to making more turnovers.
Right.
Like, I can already see if they're playing Michigan and Will Johnson is matched up with Will Howard or with Jeremiah Smith, that like he's just too confident in terms of trying to put it up for Smith, and then Johnson's able to come down with an interception.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's why you have to kind of trust in your playmakers to make something out of nothing. And I do think that Chip Kelly has been really good about that so far this season. You've seen a lot of stuff where it's like, look, Jeremiah Smith is going to get the ball 5-10 yards down the field, and we're going to watch him turn that into 50. And we've seen that multiple times, right? Like they let him run the ball, right, on that one play where he scored a touchdown. I think it was like a 19-yard touchdown.
The same exact play that they called for Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, who also scored a 19-yard rushing touchdown against Michigan State.
Yeah. Just rubbing their faces.
It's an unbelievable. It is rubbing their face in
a little bit.
To call the same exact play 2 years in a row and get a touchdown out of it in the same exact area of the field is hilarious.
It is hilarious. But that's what I'm talking about. You can be creative, and if they're fine, like, here's the thing, man. We talk about Michigan specifically. I mean, Texas did not bomb on those dudes, right? Like, they dinked and dunked their way down the field and just basically, pushed their faces into the sand. Like, that's how it worked. And honestly, that's the other thing. Texas, people are talking about how great Texas is. Texas barely ran the ball against Michigan. I
think Ewers made some throws in that game that I don't expect Howard to be able to.
I don't either, but my point is that they don't have to have the long game to beat Michigan, right? They don't need to do that. And honestly, for most of the teams on their schedule, I don't think they need that. I think what they can do
if they get a lead on Michigan, Michigan won't be able to play from behind.
No, absolutely not. But against like Oregon or Penn State or whoever else, they can rely on those playmakers to make something out of nothing. And you look at the way that like Henderson is running and the way Judkins is running. I mean, those dudes, I mean, neither of them may hit 1,000 yards this season, but they're going to be so effective when they do play because they are just playing with this extreme like violence and speed and just, aggression. And that's what you want. Especially going into Big Ten season. And, Will Howard got kind of a rude awakening, right? A little rude introduction to the Big Ten when he got the wind knocked out of him. You got to bring in, Devin Brown to throw that touchdown, which is that was one of my favorite parts about the game. I was like, all right, well, let's see what old Devin's going to do. And then he throws this great pass that, pretty much only Jeremiah Smith could have caught. And it was awesome, and it worked out, and it was fine. And then, Julian Sayin comes in the end of the game and looks pretty bad. So it was to me a pretty funny game overall. I enjoyed watching it. Offensively, like I said, this game. Here's the other thing. They throw the interception obviously earlier in the game. It kind of like resets the tenor for it, but they were driving in that on that part of the field. Like they were doing well. They had one punt in the first half, but like it didn't feel like Michigan State was stopping them. It really felt like anytime there was a mistake, anytime there was a setback or they couldn't get a first down, it's because they just made a mistake. They made a mental error or somebody was out of position or something like that. Nobody felt like they were getting beat. Like they truly seemed like they were just that much better than the team that they were playing. That's not always going to be the case, right? And so what we're going to see, especially as they play Iowa, right? At least, defensively, I'm not worried about Cade McNamara, which I saw a stat today that
he's beaten Ohio State before.
Yeah, that's true. But I also saw a stat today that Alex Orji actually has a better quarterback rating than Cade McNamara, which is, that's I think maybe damning with faint praise for
call
Alex.
that the Ferenc effect.
Yes. So I'm not worried about their offense, but defensively it's going to be a good test. And then of course you've got Oregon and all these other teams. So a lot of stuff coming up, and I really think the next 4 games is going to kind of tell us probably as much as we need to know about this team going forward. That's going to be the real test. So I'm excited for it. I thought it was a fun game. I thought they played really well. Obviously some setbacks, some things to improve upon, but that's why we like watching this sport, is to see the evolution of these teams and how they get better. So for me, the biggest thing I want them to work on obviously is the, slow-ish start on defense and see if they can get that shored up and figure that out a little bit earlier. Offensively, I'm not that worried. I think they're fine. I think they'll be all right. I think Will Howard's going to have better games and learn from it and realize that he doesn't have to do everything. Let me ask you this, because we were talking about that. We were talking about like, what are you more worried about? We were saying before we started recording. I want to go back to that question. How did you phrase that before we started?
What greater concern do you have coming out of this game? Are you more discouraged by Howard or by the defense?
Yeah, and I think both of them. I don't think discouraged is the right word, but I think what I want to know more about, what I want to see.
If a man put a gun to your head and said, which one of these things do you feel worse about after this game? Which one
I would want to see. I want to see more progression from the defense. I want to see the defense. Like I said, I want to see them have quicker starts. I want to see them really clamp down on teams from the jump. And they're going to have a good opportunity to do that in the next game. So
I'm more worried about Howard just because the potential for him to, like, if the defense makes a mistake as a unit, I'm confident that Knowles combined with the level of talent eventually can get that correct.
Yeah, they'll figure it out.
It's not totally consequential for a game.
You got that Kyle McCord PTSD, man. That's what's causing
that is exactly right. We saw because of what he did last year that one turnover, like the defense can't commit turnovers.
Right.
It can only get them free.
Right.
Except in the instance where, they a Maurice Claret situation where the defense picks the ball off and then gets it punched out on the return or something.
Right.
The defense is not committing turnovers. The offense is the one that commits the turnovers. And if you commit too many turnovers, you're inevitably going to lose regardless of who your opponent is. Howard, there's still a little too much cowboy in that guy. Just a little too much.
We need to tamp down his enthusiasm.
Right, we saw it in the
Midwest
Marshall
stoicism.
game. We saw it in the Marshall game, and we saw it in this game too. And we saw it in the Marshall game in a different capacity than we saw it in this game. And I'm just worried about the two ways in which those turnovers manifested across both of those games having an impact later in the season, where in the Marshall game, it was just, I'm going deep to Jeremiah, screw it. And then this game, it was just making a really, really bad throw when you had committed to throwing to that receiver before the snap, which is something that McCord would do a lot last year.
Yeah.
So I'm worried that if they're hell-bent on going downfield to Jeremiah, that the fact that Howard's deep ball just really isn't there is going to be a catalyst for turnovers down the road that could potentially put this team in a compromising position in the same way that McCord did it in the Michigan game last year. So I'm confident in the defense ability to correct itself. I think that Ryan Day has proven himself capable enough as a quarterback whisperer and Chip Kelly as a play caller that they'll be able to mitigate any, they'll be able to save Will Howard from himself to an extent if they need to.
Right.
But it only takes one catastrophic decision to cost your team the result. And the same can't be said for the defense having that kind of potential. I mean, granted, they could, blow one coverage and that ends up totally making a difference. That's what happened to Ohio State against Georgia in the college football playoff a couple of years ago.
Right.
But
there's a difference between giving up a touchdown and throwing an interception, like, on your opponent's 5-yard line, and then they score a touchdown after that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the impact, I think, is more definite. Like the mistakes from offense can be, I think, more damaging than the mistakes on defense. I totally see what you're saying on that.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely agree with that. All right. So again, fun game, a lot to learn from. I think they'll continue to improve, but tests are coming up. Also coming up is Ask Us Anything. But before we do that, when I remind you that we are sponsored by the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, drygoods.11warriors.com. Check it out. Let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. I'm going to remind you that you can ask us anything by sending us questions to Dubcast at 11warriors.com. This first one is from Asher, who says, "Hey, Johnny and George, longtime listener here. Thanks, Asher. I just graduated in May and finished my time at OSU by going to a bunch of the buildings I hadn't been in yet. Congratulations on graduating as well. That's fantastic. My question is, what is your favorite building or part of a building on campus? I'm personally a fan of the WPA murals in Stillman Hall, which I didn't know existed until my final semester at Ohio State. Thanks, Asher." There's a lot of cool stuff around campus. I had an anthropology course in Orton Hall my senior year of Ohio State, junior or senior, one of the two. And the classroom itself was kind of ridiculous because it was hot in there. It was like super hot, and it was all natural light. Basically, like they didn't have really good lighting in it. And so I just wanted to fall asleep the entire time. But I also always love going to the Orton Geological Museum, which they've got these really cool like skeletons and casts of like ancient animals. They've got like a huge armadillo skeleton, a giant sloth skeleton, and all these other, geological wonders. And it's free. If you ever go on Ohio State's campus, you got to check it out. It's where the chimes are. Orton Hall is instantly recognizable. It's got the turret, right, with the, where the chimes are and whatnot. That's probably one of my favorite parts on campus. I really, really liked it. I was a history major, so Dulles Hall, where the history department is located, sucks. It's really bad. And then for grad school, I was in Arps Hall, which is like, at the time it felt like all the floors were just going to collapse in on themselves. So I enjoyed when I could go to different buildings that I wasn't normally stuck in. So I would say Orton is probably my choice for that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few different ones. I was in business scholars, and so I stayed in I think it was not the Blackwell, that's the hotel. It was Blackburn was the hall I was in, which which hadn't been renovated since my dad was in school at Ohio State. And then
nice.
Of course, I think a year or two after I graduated, they renovated North Campus and South, which was pretty devastating. But I was in basically a sardine can with three other people in a dorm that hadn't been renovated since the 70s. So I was pretty eager to get out to other spaces on campus when I was a freshman. So I was in the business. The flip side of that was I was in the business school right away. I didn't have to apply after my freshman year, so I had access to go study there. And yeah, they had a lot of really great little nooks and crannies and spaces and study halls across all of the buildings and classrooms in that campus. So I'd spent a lot of time there. I enjoyed it there a lot. Another place I would spend a lot of time just because eager to get out and was the RPAC is incredible. I mean, it's
Oh my God, dude.
It's one of the best workout facilities for any like college campus in America. So I would spend 5 days a week there pretty much. I'd swim the pool 3 times.
It's incredible.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'd run on Tuesdays and Thursdays and lift too. And it was it's like, why wouldn't I take advantage of this resource?
George, I'm old enough to remember Larkins Hall, which was the rec center before that.
Yeah,
and I went in there. I think the last year that they had it open was my freshman year. And it was like walking into, like, if tetanus was a building, that's what it was. Wow. Like it was dank and like the walls were sweating constantly, like old gyms do. It felt like half of it was underground. It was just this terrifying, like Marquis de Sade kind of built. It was just gross. Everything about it was gross. Every surface, you were like, there's just so much bacteria and all of it. And so, they tear it down. They spend a year building the RPAC. And I remember when I walked in the RPAC for the first time, I thought I was like on a spaceship. Like it was just unbelievable to me that you could have these insane amenities. And yeah, it's incredible. RPAC.
And because I was coming from North Campus, I would always come in on the Scarlet Walkway.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you got
it. So I always had a very dramatic entrance.
That's right.
It was always very fun. And make my way down to Cardio Canyon, and it was
great.
Awesome. It's great. The one place I think similar to Asher kind of being like, oh, I didn't really discover this until I was a senior. I didn't discover this until years after I graduated. Was the top floor of the Thompson Library?
Yeah, since they've renovated it, it's fantastic.
I thought that they renovated it like within shortly after I discovered it. And I was like, this is an unbelievable space. And I remember posting about it in our Slack, and then somebody corrected me and they were like, pretty sure that was there when we were in school. And so I was just like, oh, okay. This was always here and I should have taken advantage of it, but I just never did.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
There's
I wish I had, because it's very, very scenic views and a very nice, quiet space.
Yeah,
there's a great, great place to go.
There's a couple buildings like that. I know on the top of the architecture building, they've got like a garden, basically.
And that would be the last one I would say. Yeah. It's just the architecture building generally. I never had a class in there, but the 1 or 2 times that I did go in there, it's definitely my favorite designed place out of any buildings on campus. It's definitely the most fun to look at.
It's really cool inside. Because it's set up like a space for all these architecture students to have all their stuff, and I really enjoyed that.
I can't believe the architecture building is the aesthetically pleasing space on campus.
It was actually really controversial when it was built. I don't want to get into the whole thing because it would take forever, but a lot of people were really against it. They were dead set. They thought it was a terrible, design or whatever. All right, this next one's from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know, if you could be a college football color commentator, who would be your co-host? Who would be your sideline reporter?
Ooh.
First of all, Alvin, I resent the fact that you don't think I have the chops to do play-by-play. That's messed up. How dare you, sir? But you're right. I would have to. I couldn't. I actually don't have the chops. I would want Brad Nessler. Brad Nessler has been my favorite dude for a very long time in terms of play-by-play. Him and Todd Blackledge, when they were partnered together, I thought that was it. For me, that was unbeatable. I'm not a big Musburger fan. Some of these other guys. Nessler and Blackledge to me was all time. As far as sideline reporters, I really like Rob Stone. Rob Stone I thought was awesome back in the day when he was a sideline guy. He does soccer stuff now, which is fine, and he's good at it, and I appreciate that. But as a sideline reporter, he was elite. There is one bit that he did. It was a game, I guess it was a new game with New Mexico State or something like that. And Rod Stone went to their pepper, like their horticulture department, and ate a bunch of really hot peppers. And you can still find that segment on YouTube, and it's extremely funny because he like is biting into these like 12 million Scoville unit peppers and just saying like, I don't know, how many of these do I got to eat? And then the rest of the segment is just clips of him throughout the day, like suffering. And it's really, really funny. Holly Rowe, I'm also a big fan of Holly Rowe. I think she's excellent. Super professional, gets really good, quotes from coaches and is on top of everything. So, yeah, that would be my dream team. I'd be all about that.
I have a more realistic answer, and then I have like a fantasy answer. Like if I totally had.
What is a realistic answer to this question?
Okay, so the realistic answer is I would want either Marv Albert or Kevin Harlan.
Okay.
Probably Kevin Harlan.
I love Kevin Harlan. That dude rules.
Active.
He's awesome.
I think he is the most underrated color commentator of all time. And it's not just because he sounds like Marv Albert. He makes football and basketball so much more exciting.
No, I actually 100% agree with that. Yeah, he does not get his flowers.
I would want Kevin Harlan in the booth with me. And then, I mean, realistically speaking, sideline reporting is it's not very difficult. So I don't necessarily need somebody that is like homegrown in football. I can just get someone that I know is already good at it across the board. So yeah. I would have Allie LaForce because I think she is the best one for basketball, and she does a great job with TNT.
She's really good. Yeah.
If not her, then I'm kind of shocked that ESPN has relegated Cassidy Hubbard to sideline reporting on the NBA when I thought she used to do a really good job as a studio host. Mm-hmm. So I think I think she is more talented for that role than she deserves to be stuck in. So but if she's going to be stuck as a sideline reporter, I wouldn't mind having her because I know she's overqualified for that role. Now, if I had total creative control of the situation, here's what I would really want to do.
All right.
I would pull Vern Lundquist out of retirement, and I would give him some sort of anti-aging medication where he feels like he can do this job with me for the rest of my life, so I never have to lose Vern, because Vern, just for me, his voice is synonymous with college football, and I know, Johnny, you feel differently, but
I don't like Vern. I've never liked Vern.
He used to make games.
I got so sick of him going, "Oh my gosh," at like a 5-yard like run, and he's like, "I can't believe it." It's like, dude, just chill a little.
Now, granted, I mean, I understand. Like, it used to drive me nuts when the CBS crew would gas up, quarterbacks like Greg McElroy.
Oh my God, like, yes.
Look at the way he hands the ball off.
Yeah, but that's right.
The same time, I was never one of those Ohio State fans that was like, oh, I can't watch the SEC on CBS just because I despise the SEC. So I used to watch those games partially just because of how good I thought Vern was. So I would have Vern in the booth with me. And then, as I just softly alluded to, I don't have a lot of respect for sideline reporting. So I would want to cast somebody in that role that I could just openly make fun of and chide and chastise as like get out of here. We don't need to hear from you anymore.
And so here for the side. Okay, shut up. Go away.
That's right. And so because I know he is desperate to be in a television role based on the interview that he did after breaking the biggest story of his career to his former employer after he was cast off by them, I would have Brett McMurphy as my son.
He definitely, Brett McMurphy definitely has sideline reporter energy. Like,
and every time he would be saying like in the middle of whatever, like, all right, let's go down to Brett on the field. I would
shut up, Brett.
I would cut him off after 3 sentences in the middle of it. I'd be all right, Brett, shut up. We're getting back to the game.
That's really funny. No, and again, I'm not one of those Ohio State fans who like hates Brett McMurphy. Like, I am, but
he sucks.
Well, he definitely, like I said, he's got sideline reporter energy, and I'm here for that. That's pretty good. Okay, this next one's from Kevin, who wants to know what other Ohio State sports do you think may win national championships? Well, I can tell you two are pretty much locks. Synchronized swimming and women's hockey. You're going to see more from them. Like
and riflery.
And riflery.
I don't think synchronized swimming is an official sport at Ohio State.
They still win championships. It doesn't matter.
They do. I just don't think that they're technically part of the athletic program.
Well, I say they are. How about that? I'm declaring.
They're certainly dominant enough to be. I don't dispute that. But riflery, I think, is definitely at the top because the run that they've been on for the last 15 or 20 years is absolutely
pretty ridiculous. I would love to say that wrestling would be able to pull another one out, but Penn State is just looking like another Iowa from the 70s, 60s and 70s and 80s. And so, I would love to see it happen. I just don't know that it will. So, yeah, I think there are definitely some sports that you can kind of rely on right now because they're just so freaking dominant. And I don't know that, we'll see another championship from women's hockey this season. There's a lot of competition. They lost a lot of players, but they still have, I think the best player in women's college hockey and probably the best coach in women's college hockey. So, anything could happen. Last one here. This is from our friend Jen, who wants to know, what is the best classic board game? What do you think?
Monopoly.
So we were talking about this before we started recording, and you're talking about the emotions that it elicits, and I do have to give it credit for that. Like the sheer anger that they can cause. I got to respect it on that level.
Yes.
It just takes too damn long. It's so long to play. It just takes so freaking long.
But that's what I think is so remarkable about it is that how many games that never actually end reach the cultural significance that Monopoly has.
That's true.
That's how
been around a while.
Fun that it is. But I agree. It is somewhat underwhelming the fact that you can never actually finish a game.
And it does take a while for it to really ramp up. That's the other thing. You really have to put some time into it before it gets truly insane. But once it does, I do agree. The high stakes are really great. And here's the thing I'll say in defense of Monopoly. It's not my favorite, but I do like it. All that time that it takes to get up to that point where you're high stakes, that's what makes that anger and that emotion come out, because you're I spent 4 hours building up Park Place. That's where you really kind of start to lose it a little bit. So I enjoy that quite a bit. Monopoly's good. It's not, like I said, not my favorite, but I respect it a lot. It's a fun game. I really like Sorry when I was a kid, mostly because it gives you so many opportunities.
I did too.
Yeah, it just gives you so many opportunities to screw over your opponents. And that's really kind of as a kid, what you're looking for, particularly if you're playing against your parents and you're just kind of trying to figure out a way to even the odds. Sorry, I was a big fan of. I like Risk a lot, although nobody actually wants to play Risk. That's the thing. I love the strategy of it. And maybe the whole nerdy Warhammer 40K part of it, where it's we got the little figurines and I'm attacking things and blah, blah, blah. I like that element of it. And I think people in theory like playing Risk, but when you start playing Risk with people, you start to realize that they don't actually want to play Risk. They kind of like the idea of themselves playing Risk and being good at it. But it's a long game too, and it takes forever to kind of build up. But that's another one of those things where the stakes get super high, and that's when it's fun. So, but for me, I think Sorry is probably my favorite, just because it's just constant aggression against your opponents, and I enjoy that quite a bit. So that's Ask Us Anything this week. Thank you so much for sending those in. Real quick, we got a few more things to talk about. There were other games that were played, believe it or not, this past weekend. Georgia-Bama was insane. They were just throwing haymakers at each other at the end of the game. Ryan Williams, 17-year-old Ryan Williams.
How old is he?
I don't know. Which it is notable, his age, because it is bonkers that he's as good as he is. Milroe was just chucking it to him and he was bringing it down. And, that entire sequence where Georgia comes back from an insane deficit to take the lead, and then Alabama punches right back, retakes the lead. Georgia marches down the field, and then Carson Beck just throws this really stupid interception. Like they had tons of time, and I think it was like 1st and 10 that he threw it on. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going for the end zone in double coverage. Let's win it here." And I'm like, "You were gonna win the game. Like you were gonna win the game. Like neither team seemed to show any ability to stop each other." And he just made a stupid decision at that point. But super entertaining. I had a lot of fun watching it. I mean,
it was agonizing for me as an Ohio State fan, just because it was so funny in the preseason, and then through the first couple weeks of the season, you heard so many people that were Ohio State fans that were anointing Jeremiah Smith as not only the best freshman receiver or best freshman in college football, but the best receiver in college football, period. And, I was preaching, let's pump the brakes and see how it goes, not because of anybody else in the sport, but just because I wanted to, temper expectations and not be let down. But then also through the first couple weeks, you start hearing the whispers about, this guy Ryan Williams, and Bama doesn't play anybody until Wisconsin. And so you're like, okay, whatever, it's not like Ohio State has played anybody yet, but let's see how it plays out. And then they had almost identical stats through the first 3 games on each team's schedule, which was kind of crazy. I think Smith had 4 more catches, but Williams had like 4 more yards, but they had identical touchdowns. And then Smith has the game that he does against Michigan State. He scores a rushing and a receiving touchdown.
Right.
And he has 2 back-to-back absurd one-handed catches. And if you're an Ohio State fan, you're like, all right, he's got it in the bag after tonight. Like he's, Ryan Williams is going to have to do something pretty crazy.
Yeah, like otherworld play.
Wrestle that title away from Jeremiah Smith after what just happened. And
he does.
Well, before he did it, it was interesting because he actually, and this is going to be lost to the annals of history, but he almost committed a catastrophic error on special teams.
That's a good point.
For Alabama, where he muffed the kickoff after Georgia retook the lead.
That's
and
right.
Alabama gets put on like their own 2 or 3 yard line. And at that point, I'm thinking, oh, well, not only would Jeremiah Smith never do something like that, but this is great because now Bama's gonna there's no way they're gonna score with this field position, and they have effectively blown the game in humiliating fashion at Georgia. I don't even care that the higher ranked team isn't gonna fall now and potentially help Ohio State's ranking, and just because. Yeah, and everybody's going to blame everybody's going to blame Ryan Williams for, screwing that up, and it's great. And then Ryan Williams pulls out the greatest play I think I've ever seen a receiver make.
It was
at any level of football.
It was pretty bonkers.
I've never seen that. I can't get over whether the body control on the catch was better or whether the hesitations. I never thought I would see a better spin move than the one Braxton did in the Virginia Tech game.
I still think that was better.
Dude,
but
that one
it was close.
I've never seen a person move like that.
Yeah.
But that's why I think the body control might actually be better, is because he caught the ball and then spun back into the sideline to regain his balance.
Yeah, and didn't fall forward. Yeah.
I can get over the fact that he's as young as he is or whatever, but just the instincts for any player, period, to do that.
It's pretty wild.
I
want to tell you something, though.
He's the best receiver in college football right now. It's 1A, 1B, Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith. It's a Messi Ronaldo situation where it's like there's those two, one's better than the other one, but then there's literally everybody else.
Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty sick. I mean, I was hoping that Georgia would pull the upset for the same reasons you listed, just because it would have been extremely funny. But what we got was also pretty incredible.
Well, too. Georgia was the favorite. You mean you wanted them to come back?
Well, just because of how devastating it would be to Alabama.
Yeah, No, I mean, it would have been great.
Yeah. So that was incredibly entertaining. Really, really good game to watch. UK finally got their top 10. They screwed up, and it was funny because Mark Stoops even admitted it after beating Ole Miss, that he was kind of a wuss or something against Georgia and not going for it on 4th down. And he was like, well, yeah, that was pretty stupid. And then,
you live and you learn.
You live and learn. And then they come out and they take it to Ole Miss, which good. I never want Ole Miss to be successful in anything. I hope that school and that program is awful forever. Even though Lane Kiffin's in like his likable era right now, I don't want to see.
Well, he started doing all these like pregame TikToks with his daughter.
Did you see him
now? And I was just like, "There's no way this is going to end well."
Did you see him on freaking game day where he's got like one hand in his pocket and he's got like a suit jacket? I'm like, relax, Joey Freshwater. Like, chill for a little bit. That's not why we like you again. It's because you're like cool guy again. Like, chill out.
It took him 2 weeks to blow all of the good
right.
What's the word for it?
The goodwill, the
goodwill
vibes
that he built up after being in everyone's doghouse for so long.
Exactly. So UK takes him down. That was fun. Take that, rebel scum. Michigan wins, air quotes, against Minnesota. I had a lot to say about that. The rules
of the game rewritten once again in the process.
Right. Yeah, I had a lot to say about that. I wrote about it in Threat Level. If you want to read my full thoughts, you can go ahead and check that out on the website. Basically, what it boils down for me is this: Michigan played like crap, particularly in the second half. I think they had something like, I don't know, like 50 yards of offense or something. They get bailed out. So they're winning pretty significantly against Minnesota. PJ Fleck has no idea how to attack Michigan's defense for an entire half. And then he's like, oh, let's just throw slant routes. And that's what he did. And for some reason, Michigan defensive coordinator Wink Martindale just stayed in man coverage for basically the entire second half as Minnesota continued to drive on them. And he's like, this is fine. And so Minnesota, by the way, we're talking about great catches. I got to tell you something, man. A strong contender, and I know this is high praise, but a strong contender for best catch of that day was Tyler Morris's end zone touchdown, where he catches a ball. He's being draped by a Michigan defender, cannot see the ball. He catches it like facing towards the end of the end zone. Like he catches it one-handed as it's coming toward him, and he's not looking at it. And then he has to like twist, like do a turn to keep himself in bounds. It's an unbelievable play. It gets Minnesota within 3. They get the onside kick. They successfully recover the onside kick, and they're called for offsides on the onside kick. First of all, completely wrong. They were obviously onside. I don't understand how you make that call there. Secondly, Michigan fans have been trying to reflexively go, but it hit him.
Illegal touching.
First of all, they're basing that on one angle, and I saw like on Reddit and on Michigan sites and stuff where people were just like hanging their hat on that, like so desperately. No, we didn't get a good call. We didn't get a good call. First of all, there was no illegal touching. If you look at it from the initial angle where it's from the other side of the field, from the kicking side of the field, it's clear that the guy that they say touched the ball was like 3 feet away from it. It's possible that Minnesota might have started blocking before the ball traveled 10 yards. I don't actually care. My point is that Michigan sucks and they have no passing game. Colson Leveland was back. Didn't matter. Alex Orji still threw for like 86 yards and one unbelievably bad interception. Cal Molling's the guy who they think is just going to save their entire season. He ran for 111 yards, but it took him 1 trillion carries to get there. And fully half of his carries went for 1 yard or less. All right. That is not a recipe for success. This is a bad football team. I'm still pissed USC didn't beat them. They just gave them their worst thing. And I'm super pissed that the refs basically allowed them to just walk away with this because Minnesota was going to score on that once they recovered that offensive.
Yeah, but between that and the no call on the face mask of Aiden Childs' fumble, it seemed like the Big Ten officials were determined.
They've been bad all season.
Golden geese.
They have been bad all season, and I don't know. It's bonkers, and it's been everywhere. I don't think any one team is like the beneficiary of this, but they have been just straight garbage. There's a crazy NIL situation at UNLV. A guy was promised $100K, at least according to his agent, $100K verbal promise, never got it. A lot of back and forth. He dipped after a few games. Yes, it doesn't matter. He's now ranked, so whatever. Here's what I'll say. And so far as this actually impacts Ohio State, just as someone who knows slightly more than the average person talking out of their butt, don't worry about that kind of thing happening at Ohio State. The things that Ohio State are doing with NIL and player compensation, things like that, are very above board, at least as far as it comes between the relationships of players and the athletic department. They're going to get paid. The players that are promised things will get what they've been promised at Ohio State. And I think that's honestly one of the selling points, that they're not going to get screwed in this. Like, if you go to Ohio State, you're not going to get screwed, right? Like, they're going to give you what they say they give you, and they're not going to go back on.
Yeah. Which is just, one more thing that we can take for granted as Ohio State fans. But
exactly.
I still think that between that and the details of what happened with Michigan State last year after Mel Tucker was fired, it shows you how crucial of a component this is for the players right now in college football, and how little recourse there is for the players when the rug gets pulled out from underneath them. And so you do sympathize with them to a certain extent. Now, what's particularly funny about this situation is, I've been working on this data model, if you will, for trying to predict slim underdogs, like in games that are lined within a field goal. And it's been pretty successful. Like, I tested it over all of the last seasons going back to 2019, except for the COVID season. And so I've been regularly corresponding with Dan as like a second set of eyes in terms of what my picks have been for this season, or who I think is going to do well. And one of the games lined within a field goal this past weekend that caught my eye as an underdog was Fresno State against UNLV. And I thought, Fresno State, the model's telling me that they're a good underdog pick here. And I think based on the kind of crazy situation that's happening there with the quarterback, that's a big enough distraction that this could end up coming back to bite them in the butt a bit. So I think they're probably a good bet this week. And talking it over with Dan a bit more, he was telling me, like, I looked into it a little bit, and UNLV's new QB actually seems pretty legit. And that would probably explain why UNLV is still not only favored, but why they didn't bend over backward to meet Sluka's demands.
Right.
And so I was like, well, UNLV, it seems like they've been better rushing the ball than passing it so far anyway. And, when I looked into the actual stats, it made sense to me why Sluka was demanding what he did. Because he, through, I think, 3 or 4 games, through 3 games, had over 250 rushing yards already this season and was averaging over 6.5 yards per carry. And he ran the ball almost 20 times against Kansas when they beat them a couple weeks before this past weekend. So I was like, okay, I can respect why Sluka's commanding the money he does. We'll see if the quarterback, can improve their passing game a bit, because it hasn't really been there. It's been more about their rushing attack the first 3 weeks. And Dan tells me, Haj Malik, who was the replacement for him, was a great passer and runner in high school, so he could be an upgraded passing. And then Saturday, Dan sends me a tweet that says, UNLV quarterback Haj Malik Williams is 11 of 14 for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns, and has the Rebels up 28-0 on Fresno State.
Is this, by the way, the first time they've ever been ranked? I feel like
I don't think so. I think there was a long time ago, like closer to when I was in high school, they were like, there was one team they had before that was like reasonably good.
Okay. Because that's what I thought too. No, okay, so real quick. So they're ranked number 25th, and it is their first AP top 25 ranking in program history.
That's crazy.
I think it's crazy too. And because when I saw that, I was surprised, because I gotta remember some of these teams have been okay. But yeah, it's the first time they've broken in, so good for them.
But yeah, I mean, it's just very funny that, we talk about how, it's so tumultuous and a distraction for these schools, this NIL thing, and, how it can potentially be a distraction. And then it's like, UNLV was already having a good season, and now it's gotten even better. And
right.
Matt Sluka kind of looks
right.
Like, we'll see who ends up paying him now. I mean, because that's the other side of this, is that what school is going to want to welcome you as a distraction and give you money when you
in the middle of the season? Probably, yeah, like nobody. I mean,
well, not even just in the middle of the season, but after the way that he kind of handled this.
Oh, sure, yeah.
In terms of like what school is going to voluntarily sign up for that potential headache.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much he's. First of all, like I feel bad for him. And I feel bad for the school. The person to blame in this whole situation is the agent that
you got to get something
saying,
in writing. Like
no,
they're talking about like all these verbal agreements.
We had a verbal agreement.
Right.
It's like on It's Always Sunny when Mac and Dennis are selling real estate and Mac bullies those people in the house.
That's right.
To getting the house. You heard them, dude. This is a binding verbal contract. It's like it doesn't mean anything.
Right, exactly.
They said, we will buy this house. They said, we will pay you $100K to play at UNLV. It's ridiculous.
Last thing two more things, I guess, real quick. Women's hockey, didn't work out super hot for them the first couple games. That's fine. They bounced back. Bemidji State, they took them down.
We knew they would.
They're great. Coach Muzzerall's also great. They're back. They're back, guys. So definitely check them out. Keep an eye on them. Also Pete Rose. I got to say this as an SOB myself, Southern Ohio boy. Pete Rose, hit king of baseball, unfortunately passed away. I think he was 82, 83.
83, I believe.
83. Spent the last basically 3 or 4 decades in Vegas, signing autographs by day and doing the slots by night. And I guess, hey, let him live. Pete Rose, I gotta say, basically the epitome of the Cincinnati man, like just, bad hair, bad fashion sense, mediocre in all aspects, except like complete grit. And, he was, the thing about Pete Rose that's so fascinating to me is that this guy played until he was like almost at his mid 40s. He was a really good player until he was like 41, like is when he started falling off. And he was just this marginal athlete. Like he was like the guy ran probably like a 6-second 40. He would get he could barely throw from third base to first base, but he could just freaking hit. And he did that for decades. And it's kind of unbelievable. You watch him, like old clips of him, his batting stance. He looks like an idiot. Like he's never like actually hit a baseball before, and he made it work. And, for people who follow Pete Rose, that's what they loved about him. It was this fact that this guy who by all rights should not be doing what he's doing, but did it. And, again, as a human being, you got a lot of problems with Pete Rose as a human being. A lot of crappy things he did in his life. I won't defend any of those, but as a sports figure, I think definitely somebody who captured the imaginations of a lot of people, and still does in Southwestern Ohio. So you got to acknowledge it, and Pete Rose Way is still called Pete Rose Way for a reason down near Riverfront.
I'm glad he lived long enough to become the first person to make a legal sports bet in Ohio.
That's right.
After years of admittedly running an illegal gambling den out of his own restaurant. I'm glad that he got to get that last distinction in his life before he passed away a few short years after.
And by the way, definitely bet on baseball. Definitely bet on his own team. Definitely bet on his own team to lose probably in certain games. I don't believe any of the lies or any of the things that he said. I shouldn't say definitely because I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but it's hard to trust anything that ever came out of Pete Rose's mouth. So anyway, RIP to that dude. That's it for the Dubcast this week. A little bit longer than normal, but I think it was filled with great stuff, so I'm not sweating it. We'll be back next week. We got a big one coming up, man. It's like I know we kind of talked
big mess. Maybe.
Well, it's gonna be that's the thing about this game is
I get more bad vibes from Iowa than any other team in the Big
I know.
Ten.
Well,
I'm traumatized by this team, even though Ohio State's got a pretty good overall.
If it were at Iowa, I would be sweating a little. It's not. It's at Ohio State. I'm cool with it. It should be fine. It should be a good lead into the Oregon game. I'm excited about it. We'll be back next week. They
still have that Northwestern quality about them where they can just make any game gross at any time. So I'll be until the game is in hand. I will be nervous for the result.
That's fair. All right. So we'll be back next week to break it all down and talk about it. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next week.
Take care, folks.